Hey there guys, so I have a customer who has asked me if I can make a table to match one of their end tables that they already own. So in today's video, we're basically just going to try to replicate this end table out of some oak boards. Let's get started. Alright, so I'm planning to make this little end table out of some red oak. So what I'm doing here is just taking my boards and breaking them down into some smaller pieces for milling. Alright guys, so I've broken down this oak board into smaller sections, and that's just going to make it a little bit easier for me to work with. Now I need to get this thing milled up because this is still just rough lumber, so I need to get it milled so that it's nice and flat and straight. Now, the first thing that I'm gonna do for this board is run this thing through the planer because as you can see, it has a bit of a bow here to it. So I wanna get this thing flattened out and get it to the proper, the thickness that I'm looking for. And then I'm also gonna need to join up the edges so that I can get some at least one nice edge that I can then run through my table saw so that I can cut it to the actual width that I need. But first up is let's run this thing through the planer. Okay, so first up, I'm just going to take a piece of flat plywood. Now, this thing's not exactly pretty, but it's flat and that's the most important thing. So I've just set this here. Now I'm gonna take one of my boards that I need to flatten out, and I'm just gonna place it on top of here. Now, as you can see this gap here, and that's what we want to address. So I could have used a little bit longer of a plywood piece, but this is what I had and I didn't want to cut down another one, so we're gonna use this one. Then we're just gonna take our piece that needs to be flattened and we're just gonna sit it on top of here. Now, what I like to do is I like to figure out essentially which side looks best. Fortunately, this side that has the bow in it, I can place up because that's probably going to be the top of my piece. And the reason you wanna make sure is because we're gonna drill some holes from the underside, some very small screws just to kind of hold this thing down. So you just want to make sure that whatever you're using for your top is facing up. So I'm just going to go ahead and flip this over and clamp it in place and then attach this from the bottom. Now I'm just going to countersink some holes to attach screws. All right, now I like to be mindful of the length of screws that I'm using here because I don't want screws so long where the planer blades could ever risk hitting. So I'm just using some 1-inch screws here. It's enough to grab it and sort of hold this in place, but it's not too long. Okay, now we can flip this board over. As you can see, it's nice and attached on here now. And now it's time to address the bow in our board. How we're gonna get rid of that, essentially this gap here, is if I was to just run this thing through the planer right now, basically those planer blades would just push this down, but then it would come right back up. So it would not actually be taking this bow out of the board. So in order to prevent the planer blades pushing this thing down, just gonna take a couple of shims and then place them in here where I have that gap. So that way, when those planer blades roll over this thing, it can't physically push this thing down. Now, this is in there pretty tight. You can also add a little hot glue here if you want to keep these shims in place, so that way the vibration doesn't back them back out. So I'm just gonna go along and add shims everywhere that I can visibly see any gaps where this board is not touching this plywood piece. Okay, now that I've got those shims in place, I can take this thing and start running it through my planer. All right guys, here's a little amateur tip. Just make sure that whatever scrap board you use for the sled of this thing can actually fit through your planer. For whatever reason, I picked this board and it is clearly too large to fit through my planer, so I'll be taking this all off, cutting this board down and doing this all over again. Now it was finally time to run these boards through my planer. Hold up, let me just get one good throw into my boy. Okay, now it's time. I just run the boards through a couple of times on the sled until I feel like it's good and flat.
was wondering why he was just staring me down here. That wasn't until I turned the corner and discovered, okay, message received, buddy. Now it was time to remove my board from the planer sled. I just flipped it over and took out those screws from the bottom. Then I took my board back over to the planer, this time flipping it over so that the side I just planed flat is now on the bottom, and I ran it through a couple more times to get the other side of the board flat. What bow? As you can see, mainly because I can't seem to stop pointing at it, this board no longer has that bow in it, which means that we can now move on to the next step for milling this lumber.
All right, so I've got all of my boards run through the planer now. They're sitting nice and flat. I've got them to the thickness that I need. These two are gonna be for the top, and so I've got them sitting nice and flush with one another. Now, it's a lot of work running all these boards through the planer on that planer sled and then getting this bow out, but it allowed me to basically be able to mill these boards up without the need for a really expensive, bigger joiner. So I'm okay with putting a little extra work in to take care of that. Now that I've got them all nice and flat, now I need to get a straight edge on one of the sides so that I can run that side up against my table saw fence and then get it to the width that I'm gonna need for these. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can get a straight edge on a board like this. Because these are a little bit smaller and now that I have the boards nice and flat, I think I am gonna go ahead and just run these things through that little Win benchtop joiner that I have. I find that boards this size, it does a pretty good job at getting a straight edge on them. Anything bigger, it's usually not the best on, so I try to avoid using that. But I do wanna show you one other way that I have found to basically get straight edges on a board. And this is just a very simple joiner jig that I put together. Now, this one that I have here is usually I use this for boards that are not quite as wide as these. So that's probably, well, that's exactly why I won't be using it for this project. But, because as you can see, all you would do is put this in here. And then you want to only overhang this off the jig a little bit. That's why this board is just way too wide, because I don't want to cut all of this off. But if the board was a little less wide, you would just basically put it in here, hang it over just a little bit from this edge, clamp it all down, and then run this edge up against your table saw fence. And that would basically give you one straight edge here because it's reversing off of this straight edge here. That's how I join a lot of edges on boards that are a little bit longer that I don't trust to run through that benchtop joiner. Now, I just threw this together very quickly. I do need to make a bigger one as well, or make this piece here a little bit more adjustable. So that's a project for another day. Maybe I'll put out a video on making a new one of these and one that's maybe a little bit more adjustable. But anyways, let's go ahead and get a straight edge on all of these pieces.
Now that I have my boards pretty flat on two sides, I could use those sides to run these boards through this little joiner to get one straight edge. This usually takes a couple of passes. Once I'm satisfied with my edge, then I can take that new straight edge and butt it up against my table saw fence and cut my pieces to whatever width they need to be cut to. And once I've got my boards cut to their proper width, I usually go ahead and square off the ends with my miter saw. And just like that, we now have perfectly milled lumber ready to use for our project.
All right, guys, so I've got most of the pieces roughly cut out for the table now. Now, these are all just sort of, they're not cut to their exact sizes right now, and I've done that on purpose because if I've learned anything over the years when it comes to building, it's to just be patient. A lot of the times I would get ahead of myself and just try to really go ahead and cut everything to its exact dimension up front. And then what I found is that when it comes to assembly, I might have made a mistake or cut something a little too short. So I like to just sort of wait and cut everything to its exact dimension as I'm sort of assembling it. Now, like this section right here, these are all going to be legs. I've got 4 legs here and they're all varying sizes right now because like I said, I haven't cut them to their exact sizes. And another reason for that is because now these pieces are going to need to be laminated together. Each of these pieces right here are 1 inch thick, but I would like some nice beefy legs. So by gluing these pieces together, it's gonna give me some nice solid 2 inch stock legs. So that is the plan for these, and another benefit of leaving them long and not cutting them to their exact dimensions is when I'm gluing this up, things are gonna shift around, and it's gonna be really hard to keep these edges completely flush when you're clamping them up. So by leaving them long right now, I don't have to worry about that. I can go ahead and just get these clamped up and glued up as best as I can. And then once these are dry, I can then come in and just cut them to their exact dimensions and get everything squared off. So that is the plan for these legs. The next step I'm gonna work on is basically just gluing up each of these 4 legs. I've also got to get this top glued up, so I only have enough clamps to do the legs right now. So I'll do the legs, and then I'll move on to getting the top glued up, and then I think we can start getting this thing assembled.
To laminate these legs together, I just applied a hefty amount of glue to each piece and then clamped them together just tight enough to get a good amount of glue squeezing out. Then I had a little panic attack for a second, thinking to myself that maybe I might have went a little too hefty on the glue, because there was a good chance that all of these legs might now be glued together, because they weren't separating very easily. But don't worry guys, false alarm. It was nothing that a good little whack of the hammer couldn't solve. We're still good, thank goodness. To get these legs cleaned up, I just made a couple passes on the jointer until everything was super flush with one another. Then I went ahead and squared off one end and cut each leg to their final length. Now it's time to give these legs a bit of a taper, so I'm gonna do that using this simple tapering jig that I've made in a previous video. If you wanna check that video out, I'll leave it linked below. Now I decided to just taper these legs on one side, so I simply need to run each leg through one time on this tapering jig. The last thing these legs needed was some smoothing out. So I did that using a 1/8 inch roundover bit on my palm router. This took away those really sharp edges and left me with some soft, smooth, silky legs. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but hey, at least I won't cut myself on the edges now. With those legs wrapped up, now I can shift gears to getting my top for this end table glued together. I won't make you listen to me explain all of the steps for this again because it was pretty much most of the same steps as the legs, just a bit bigger. I did fill a couple of voids in the wood with some black CA glue, let that dry, and then sanded it off before beginning to sand all of the pieces for this table. Once all of the pieces were sanded, I spent some time trying to get any remaining dust off of them using a combination of my vacuum and some tack cloths. Now it's time to get some stain on these pieces. Now, because I'm trying to match an existing stain color on another table, I made sure to do a little sample stain test to see which color was going to get me closest to that match. And after that test, it looks like the color Honey from Minwax is going to be the winner for today's stain of choice. I applied this stain to all of my pieces with a foam brush and then let that soak in for like 5 to 7 minutes before wiping away any excess with some rags. Now, I decided to go ahead and pre-stain these pieces before assembly, basically because this is going to be such a narrow table. I thought that it might be much harder to get good coverage on some of the interior facing sides with it being so narrow, so that's why I decided to stain before assembly here, which is not normally something that I would do. After letting those stain pieces dry for a couple of days, it was time to get this table assembled. Now, I went back and forth on how I wanted to join this table together. The main contributing factor was just how narrow this table was, so it made it difficult to use things like screws because they would be too tough to screw in from the inside, and I didn't want to plug holes on the outside. Well, luckily I purchased this little mortise and tenon jig called Beadlock from Rockler for a previous project, and this felt like a good option to use for this table. Now, this jig is a pretty good alternative to having to use another means of cutting mortise and tenon joints or spending the big bucks for something like the Festool domino joiner. But I'll be honest, this thing does take a while to use. It's not exactly a quick process, and that's mainly because of all of the clamping that you have to do. Maybe I don't have the best setup for it. I really need a workbench with a vise, which I think would help out with this a lot. But like I said, even though it cost a bit more time, it also cost a bit less money, which I like. Another step that I wanted to take care of before assembly was figuring out how I wanted to join my top to the base. Because this is solid wood and I want to account for seasonal wood movement, I'm going to be using some Z-clips to attach everything together. That means that I need to have some grooves in my base pieces for these clips. Now, why I didn't just run these pieces through my table saw is beyond me. Instead, I decided to use my biscuit joiner to create these grooves, which might just be one of the dumbest decisions I've made lately. Unless you're someone who enjoys being showered in copious amounts of sawdust, which I'm not. Alright, let's get this table assembled. I started by cutting some of these little tenon pieces to size, and then I applied a liberal amount of wood glue into my mortises as well as those tenons and started joining everything together. I basically clamped up the two sides of the tables and I let those pieces dry overnight before working on joining the rest of the table together. Once those pieces were dry, I could tie the rest of the table together in the same manner. This is just a reminder to future me to never chew gum in a video again. My mouth looks like it's yapping a mile a minute. I also added in some support pieces at the bottom of the table. I simply attached these pieces with some glue because it was too difficult trying to attach them with screws. Glue should hopefully be strong enough since I don't anticipate these will carry much weight since it's such a small table. Most of the table assembled, it was time to get some finish on it. I applied a couple coats of oil-based polyurethane for this table and then let it dry for a couple of days. And finally, the last step of this build was getting the top attached to the base. To do this, I'm attaching the two together using those aforementioned Z-clips. It was really hard to get a good shot of this with it being such a narrow table, but I basically just put the clips in my grooves, then pre-drilled a hole and attached with screws. This will allow the top to move seasonally as it needs to, which will hopefully prevent any sort of cracking over time. Just like that, this table is finished. What do you think?
All right guys, that's gonna wrap up this small little end table build. Overall, I'd say this was a pretty simple build. I basically just designed this entire thing from a picture that the customer sent to me to match an existing table that they had. I just went back and looked at that picture now that this table is done, and I have to say that I think I nailed it. This thing looks so similar to that existing table, and I think it's going to be a really great match. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you did, one thing that you guys can do that's super simple that really helps me out a lot is to give this video a like. That just lets YouTube know that, hey, people actually enjoyed watching this video, so they'll continue to share it to other people who might enjoy watching it as well. And if you happen to be looking for another way that you can support me in this channel, then, well, you might have noticed that I've been wearing some of this new Rusty Dog & Co. merchandise recently. And this is part of a product line that I just released on my website, rustydogandco.com, a couple weeks ago. I'll be honest with you guys, I love making these videos. I enjoy the entire process, from building things to editing the videos to sharing it with you guys. I have found this YouTube channel to be a great creative outlet for me. It keeps me inspired to keep building and keep being creative. So I truly do love making these videos and having this YouTube channel. And I have an entire list in my phone of videos that I'd like to make for this channel. But I'll be honest with you guys, one of the things that really slows me down from making videos is just the cost of making them. A lot of the things that I'm building, if it's not for a customer, a lot of those builds just cost a lot of money to build. It also costs money to make the videos themselves. So I figured if there were people out there who really wanted to invest in the growth of this channel, that really enjoy these videos and would like to see me put out more videos, then I wanted them to have a way that they could support me in this channel. So I decided that I would create some merchandise that I can sell over on my website. That way, if you're a fan of the channel, it's still a little weird to have fans, but if you are a fan of this channel, first of all, thank you so much. But now you have a way that you could support me, support some of these future builds that I have planned. Head over to my website if you're interested, rustydogandco.com. I'll leave a link to it in the description box. I will say that I have designed all of the designs 100% myself. I put a lot of thought and time into making those. I might be a little bit biased, but I think there's some pretty cool stuff over there. So if you're interested in supporting me in this channel, head over there, see if maybe you can find something that you like. And like I said, all of those purchases will help support future videos on this channel. That's gonna wrap up this video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this one, and I guess you'll just have to stay tuned to see what I build next. All right, bye.